3, we're going to talk about chapter 4. It's kind of an interesting picture. These guys all have the same shoes on, but they have different socks. Now, the interesting thing is that last Friday I lifted at the gym, and there was a guy with socks that looked exactly like this. So that's kind of interesting. So here we go. Let's go ahead and get started here. And they don't have the same color suits on. I think his is a little bit lighter. Everybody's got on blue, I guess. And the same shoes. I don't understand. Cultures around the world are different because of the need to adapt differently to different environments. And we talked about this in cultural psychology. However, there are some norms that cultures universally maintain. Almost all cultures have an incest taboo. Sometimes they don't have an incest taboo for the royal family, because the royal family in whatever culture you're dealing with, often they can only marry other god. They think of their leaders as gods, and of course gods can only marry other gods. Otherwise, they would kill the person that they were in love with. There's some form of friendship. Respect the friend's privacy is a rule of friendship. Make eye contact while talking is a rule of friendship. Don't divulge things said in confidence. People of higher status are talked to using formal talk, while those of lower status are spoken to familiarly. Familiarly. Language is a strong social identifier. Higher status people are spoken to in a formal manner, and they will speak back to a subordinate in a more familiar manner, using their first names, for example. In most languages, there are two forms of the word you, one that is formal and one that is used with friends and intimates. If you speak a foreign language like Spanish, Spanish has two and what's the other one? I can't think of the other one. But French is the same way. Vous is the familiar. In most circumstances, it is for the higher status person to suggest familiarity with the lower status person. I'm sure that you've heard that 80% of communication is nonverbal. This is why someone with autism spectrum disorder has a problem communicating. They must be taught to attend to people when they are trying to communicate in order to understand the person better. People lower on the autism spectrum, what used to be called Asperger's syndrome, can learn to attend to people easier, and for that reason, they often seem like they have no problem. And I think I'm going to show this to you if I can. There we go. Oops. Well, I guess I'm not. Okay. Nonverbal cues serve a variety of functions. They help us express our emotions. They help us to express our attitudes. They help us to express our personality. They cue us as to the emotions of others. They cue us as to the attitudes of others. They cue us as to the personality of others. These are the nonverbal cues we're talking about. The idea that humans communicate through facial expressions goes back to Charles Darwin, the expressions of emotions in man and animals that he wrote in 1872. Darwin's idea was that primary facial expressions are universal. All humans encode their emotions into their faces in the form of expressions. All humans can therefore interpret or decode the expressions accurately. Who's the happy one? There you go. She evidently she just won. This is a Jennifer, and there's one right behind her. The third Jennifer. Okay. Darwin felt that facial expressions are so expressive because they were necessary ways of communicating before the strength of language. We can tell that she's happy. We knew that she was happy and that they're not as happy, all the others. Early hominids would make a bad face when they tasted something terrible, and that would warn all the other hominids to stay away, like eating, these are lima beans. I thought those were peas for a while, but that's lima beans. I don't like lima beans either, so I agree with her. 6 major emotions. This is disgust. This is happy. This is fear. This is surprise. This is sadness. And this is anger. Okay. Are these universal? And this one is contempt. And this one is anxiety. Are those universal? This one is shame. And this one is determination. Are those universal facial expressions? And a couple more. Embarrassment and envy. Are they universal facial expressions? And pride and not impressed. Decoding facial expressions tends to be complicated when the individual is experiencing more than one emotion and all are registered on the face, and this is known as affect blending. A facial expression may be ambiguous, and interpretation depends on context and cues. Culture may dictate how a facial expression is interpreted. Each culture will maintain their own display rules for facial expressions and nonverbal communication. U.S. culture norms discourage emotional displays in men. In Japan, women are discouraged from showing strong emotion and, in fact, will cover their mouths if any emotion is evident. The Japanese express emotions in their eyes rather than in their mouths or the rest of their faces. In the United States, the dominant culture admires direct eye contact and equates it with honesty. But in many native cultures and around the world, it is considered rude. It's considered rude in Nigeria, in Puerto Rico, in Thailand, and in Japan. In Arab countries, their direct eye contact tends to be quite intense. As a matter of fact, by U.S. standards, it is considered piercing or rude the way they look at you. One aspect of nonverbal communication that doesn't register with most people is personal space. Some countries demand a great deal of personal space and others very little. The English maintain the most personal space, and this includes people from people in North America. Northern Europeans also maintain large personal space. Asians, Pakistanis, most Native American groups. Oh, no, yeah, okay. I'm not exactly sure what that list is about. Other countries have far less personal space. When they converse, they want to be close enough to touch the other person. In France, as you can see, they get really quite close. Southern Europe is the same way, Middle East, and South America. In the United States and much of the world, flashing two fingers is a symbol of peace, victory, or two. In the rest of the English-speaking world, if you make the gesture with your palm towards you, it means the same as the middle finger gesture. So this guy is saying up yours is actually what it means. Thumbs up has only positive connotations in much of the world, but in the Middle East, Italy, and Greece, it means up yours and is quite undesirable. In the United States, making a circle with your index finger and thumb means A-OK, but in France, Venezuela, Turkey, and Brazil, it means zero or worthless. In Japan, it is a symbol for money. The summoning gesture in the United States means death in Singapore and Japan, so be careful when you do that to somebody in Japan or Singapore. In most of the world, left-handed people are tolerated for their backward use of hands and no one cares. In the Middle East, India, Sri Lanka, and Africa, the use of the left hand for anything isn't tolerated because it is the hand you wipe yourself with. So they would consider that eating with your left hand as something negative. And this is the left-handed person, as you can see. She's eating with her left hand. He may be left-handed as well, but these two people are right-handed. Hand gestures that are universally recognized in select culture are referred to as emblems. Emblems are not universal, and this can sometimes lead to trouble. In 1992, President George H.W. Bush thought he was flashing the peace sign But because he was in Australia, it was equivalent to the finger. So he gave everybody in Australia the finger. In Norway in 2005, George W. Bush was meeting a crowd of well-wishers when someone in the audience yelled, "Texas." The president immediately threw up the hook 'em horns sign of the University of Texas Longhorns. Unfortunately, in Norway, the hand gesture is the sign of the devil. Whoops. First impressions, or the primacy effect, can leave such a strong lasting impression that an individual will maintain the impression even in the face of overwhelming conflicting impressions. First impressions become perhaps the most important key in information integration. It doesn't take much to develop an idea about someone that is difficult to change. When someone makes meaningful conclusions about another person's personality based on a brief encounter, it is called thin slicing. Even in the face of new and conflicting information that should prompt us to reconsider, most people will stick to their initial judgment. This is known as belief perseverance. Research shows that belief perseverance won't allow jurors to ignore inadmissible evidence. Belief perseverance also explains why scientists have a hard time discounting fabricated published data. People find inconsistent thoughts uncomfortable and unpleasant. Thus, we go with our initial thoughts, and because it takes less effort. We can use first impressions in nonverbal communication to our advantage by public speaking, make sure the opening is strong, job interviews, dress, eye contact, body posture, all affect evaluations, handshake quality affects assessment of personality, and final hiring recommendations. Work done by Carvey, Cootie, and Yap in 2010 showed that merely by standing in a high power pose, an individual could raise their testosterone level and feel more confident. This is a high power pose, and as is this. Now, the Carvey we're talking about is Dana Carvey. Dana Carvey is, of course, a comedian, but he has done this research, as interesting as that is. These are high power poses as well. Shows dominance. These are low power poses. As you can see, they're all curled up in themselves. More low power poses. Got his legs crossed, got his arms crossed. Here you go. This guy's got his arms crossed across his lap, which means that he's protecting his reproductive area. Attribution theory is a theory that tries to explain others' behavior. Attribution tends to be attributed either to external causes or internal causes. For example, researchers have discovered that men are more likely to attribute a woman's friendliness to mild sexual interest. This is known as misattribution. This particular misattribution may be one of the main contributing factors to male behavior that women consider sexual harassment or rape. Males universally tend to be more sexually assertive than women. This may be one reason why 23% of women say that they have been forced into unwanted sex, while only 3% of men admit to forcing a woman into unwanted sex. So what are we talking about? Here's 3% of men who admit it, and 23% of women who say that it has happened to them. Unfortunately, the more sexually aggressive a male, the more likely he is to misread women's communication, maybe on purpose. Fritz Heider was a Gestalt psychologist who first proposed the attribution theory in 1958. Heider noted that when someone else does something, gets in front of you in traffic, it is because of internal reasons, revenge or evilness. When we do something that could be considered incorrect, we tend to attribute it to external causes. We know exactly why we get in front of people. It's because we're... And for some reason, this is an old picture. This is 20 years old. This is me with my two children. That's my daughter, and that's my son. We had just driven her to Florida from Virginia. So that's what I looked like 20 years ago. I certainly don't look that way now, and neither actually do my kids. My daughter looks pretty much the same. My son's bigger, This is when he was, let's see, this 2002, he was born in 72, so he was 30 at this point, and she's 32. So, when deciding, I have no idea why I put that picture in there. That had something to do with another class where my students were asking me what my children looked like. And actually, I'm not taller than that much taller than them. I'm standing on a curb and they're standing on the street, so it looks like I'm taller than my son. He's actually 2 inches taller than I am. When deciding about causes of behavior, we can make one of two attributions. Internal dispositional attribution, infer a person is behaving in a certain way because of something about the person. For example, attitude, character, personality. External situational attribution infers that a person is behaving a certain way because of something about the situation. Assume most people would respond the same way in that situation. And of course, as a teacher, I have to decide all of these things, and I've discarded all of the probabilities that I will see students in a negative manner by accepting all late work and not counting off for late work. The covariation model is a theory that states that to form an attribution about what caused a person's behavior, we systematically note the pattern between the presence or the absence of possible causal factors and whether or not the behavior occurs. Kelly assumes that when we are in the process of forming an attribution, we gather information or data. The data we use, according to Kelly, are how a person's behavior covaries or changes across time, place, different actors, and different targets of the behavior. And of course, this is something that we always do. We're doing the same thing with the Salvador Ramos shooting, where he gunned down 19 fourth graders and 2 of their teachers in Uvalde, Texas. We're trying to decide, has he been acting this way for an extended length of time? Why didn't anybody notice this? And the answer is he seems to have been pretty upset for an extended length of time. I mean, he was sexually harassing women online. He was threatening people. Of course, the people were far away. The one girl was in Canada. That he said he was going to come and rape her and murder her whole family. Was there an indication that something bad was going to happen? And the answer is yeah, but you have to assume that this is a possibility. And of course, when we hear really bad news, a lot of times what we do is we discount it as them just talking. And of course, that's what happened here. Now, theoretically, tens of thousands of people are threatened online every day, and only 1 or 2 times will they actually work. Will they actually do something about it? I had an incident where I was talking to an individual online. This is when I was on Facebook, and he told me the next time I came to Indiana, where I'm from, Daleville. I'm from Daleville, Indiana. That he was going to shoot me. He was going to kill me. And it was like 3 months later that I was inducted into the Daleville High School Hall of Fame, Athletic Hall of Fame. And of course, the whole time I was standing in the middle of the basketball court, getting my award. I was scanning the rafters and the upper reaches of the basketball court, of the stands to see if he was up there with a rifle, and evidently it was just him talking. And sometimes people just make stupid statements. But if it's a continuous thing, of course, probably it should be acted on to some extent, calling the police and whatnot. By discovering covariation in people's behavior, you're able to reach a judgment about what caused their behavior. The covariation model focuses on observations of behavior across time, place, actors, and targets. Once upon a time, my wife told me that she hated me, that she didn't like me very much, and that I needed to either straighten up or she was going to leave me. But there was extenuating circumstances. She was drunk at the time. She'd been drinking. Why I become such a jerky person when she was drinking, I have no idea. But she's done it a couple times. But usually it has something to do with her drinking. Alcohol makes her see me as a much more negative figure. Normally we get along great, but on that occasion it wasn't happening, I guess. Tainted by alcohol, her brain saw me as something negative. The covariation model focuses on observations of behavior across time, place, actors, and targets. It examines how the perceiver chooses either an internal or external attribution. We make choices about internal versus external attributions by using three pieces of information. Let me take a quick drink. Lemonade. Consensus. The extent to which other people behave the same way toward the same stimulus as the actor does. Do other people suddenly become jerks when their partner is drinking alcohol? And the answer is yeah, that's not uncommon at all. Distinctiveness, the extent to which one particular actor behaves in the same way to different stimuli. And of course, no matter what the situation, sometimes she gets angry at me, like when I wanted to buy or replace our pickup truck. Because the other pickup truck wouldn't go anywhere in the wintertime. It got stuck in the snow because it was a two-wheel drive, and it didn't make any difference what tires we put on it. It wouldn't go up even the slightest rise. It would get stuck. So I convinced her that we needed to buy a new truck. Why am I talking about this? Oh, anyway, well, so even when we were arguing / conversing / disagreeing on whether we needed a new truck, she didn't want another car payment, and I agree. I didn't want another car payment either. But one semester I had to teach twice as many classes as I was supposed to. So they had to pay me overload pay, and I took that overload pay and bought a new truck for $10,000. What kind of a truck can you buy for $10,000? Well, it was I got a really good deal. It was a 1997 Dodge Dakota four-wheel drive pickup truck, that strange green / teal color, and it only had 30,000 miles on it. We really, really lucked out. And now both of us love it, so I guess we're okay. Consistency, the extent to which the behavior between one actor and one stimulus is the same across time and circumstances. And of course, that's what we're actually talking about. Internal attribution occurs when consensus is low, behavior is unique to the person, and of course that's what was going on with drinking and me being a jerk. Distinctiveness is low. Person displays same behavior with different targets and in different situations. And consistency is high. The person's behavior occurs reliably across occasions. And that's what we're looking for. Yeah, it wasn't you. I'll bet it was, you little P-dog. External attribution occurs when consensus is high. Other people behave similarly in the same situation. Distinctiveness is high. Well, and that's how I came up with the conclusion that I'm a jerk only when my wife is drinking. That it really doesn't have anything to do with me because I don't drink, for one thing. But my personality doesn't change that much from when she's drinking and when she's not drinking. So it must have something to do with her drinking. She doesn't drink very much anymore. Well, anyway, she's not drinking much anymore. Distinctiveness is high. The person's behavior is specific to that situation or target, and that's what I determined with the drinking. And consistency is high. The person's behavior occurs reliably across occasions, and unfortunately, my personality didn't change when depending on when she was drinking. It was kind of interesting. Sometimes we go out to eat, and of course I don't drink alcoholic beverages, and she would have a glass of wine or 2 glasses of wine, and when we're driving home, she's just glaring at me. So I kind of figured, oh, that must be it. While information about all 3 dimensions may not be available, people will still make attributions. Most frequently, consistency and distinctiveness are used more than consensus. Humans are amazingly adaptive creatures. A small change in social situation will affect drastically how a person feels and reacts to the social circumstance. The difficulty for the social scientist is gauging which factor is the most important, the individual's internal criteria or the change in social situation. Thus, people assume that what is presented is the legitimate and perpetual feeling of the actor, and this, of course, is known as the fundamental attribution error. Just because they act this way today, maybe they won't act that way tomorrow. Hopefully they won't, if it's a negative behavior. When Sylvia plays paintball, she becomes quite aggressive. Tobin had only seen her at the paintball field, so when he saw her at the grocery with her school friends, he greeted her very loudly and called her Mad Dog. The friends had never seen her playing paintball, so they teased the shy girl mercilessly. Sometimes your personality changes. The male ego seems to use the fundamental attribution error often to maintain his ego. Peter Ditto set up an experiment where men met a woman, and then the woman rated the men on her impression of them. The men then guessed whether the woman liked them or not. When they were told that her negative criticism was part of the experiment, they discounted what she said. But when they were told that her positive comments were part of the experiment, they didn't believe it. They still thought she was attracted to them. Even when we know different, we assume that other people are the way that they act. And this is especially true of men and women. And this may be one of the reasons why you need to be careful who you smile at. If they are deluded, and especially if they're male, they may think that you are attracted to them. They may think you're coming on to them. When trying to explain our own behavior, we tend to attribute behavior to situations. I was angry because everything was going wrong. When explaining other people's behavior, their behavior is what they are. He is hostile because he is an angry person. Voters come to like just elected candidates. This is called the honeymoon period. Contestants value prizes more just after receiving them. People develop an instant liking for those they are about to meet. These are part of the fundamental attribution error. When Germain goes to parties, he is always amazed at how easily everyone melds with each other. He always feels shy and tense. Reality is probably that everyone feels pretty much the same as Germain does. Researchers have known for decades that there is a difference between the perspective of being an actor in an event and an observer of that event. When we are the actor, the environment around us commands our attention. When we watch an event, we watch the actor in the event, and the environment becomes less visible. Thus, the person we see as the focus is always the cause. And this is known as perceptual salience. And this is a real serious problem with direct observation. And this is one of the reasons why they always interview everybody when a tragedy occurs. They always interview everybody to see what their perception was. Because when something happens and you're not the actor, then all you're seeing is the actor. When you're the actor, you see the entire environment. Celeste was working undercover with the meth suppliers in Gallup. Word got back to her that her cover was blown. As she walked past Smokey's Roadhouse on her way to her pickup, she heard a speeding car behind her. She turned and drew her pistol. She caught sight of a man sticking a rifle out the window of the car and fired just as the car swerved into oncoming traffic. That's what happened. As Mary pulled out of the gas max across the street from Smokey's, she saw a woman draw a gun, wheel around toward traffic, and fire indiscriminately at the car trying to get out of the way. The car plowed into oncoming traffic. When questioned on the witness stand, she did not see the rifle or perceive the car as speeding. Why not? Because what she was looking at was Celeste. She saw the gun and her focus was on the gun. Crazy lady with a gun. And Celeste. One of the most persistent fundamental attribution errors around the world is the perception of poverty. And of course that had to do with eyewitness accounts. Okay. One of the most persistent fundamental attribution errors around the world is the perception of poverty. People who attribute poverty and unemployment to personal dispositions, they're lazy and undeserving, tend to adopt political positions unsympathetic to such people. People sympathetic to their plight tend to attribute poverty to external attributions. Attribution is usually a two-step process. When something happens to us involving someone else, our first instinct is to detect an internal attribution. This may be an evolutionary reaction to protect us from a possible attacker. Hopefully, we are open-minded enough to reevaluate our initial response and possibly adjust our initial reaction. Adjustment, however, requires effort and conscious attention. And of course, if we have to spend that much energy, we just don't want to do it. It doesn't always happen. You have to think about it. People don't want to think about things. What was I talking about? The other day I was talking to my sister. And we were talking about something, and I shouldn't do this. It's cruel of me to talk about things because a lot of times my sister just doesn't want to deal with things. So we were talking about something that had happened. It was the shooting in Buffalo, I think it's what it was. Anyway, she said, I started telling her about some of the things that they had discovered, and she says, as once I heard about it, I didn't want to hear about any more of it. I just didn't want to deal with it. So whereas I'm studying the situation, trying to figure out who this guy was, my sister, because she doesn't like negative things, decided that she would ignore all the information coming in about the shooter in Buffalo. So she didn't have a clue that the shooter in Buffalo had driven 200 miles to go to shoot up a black grocery store. She didn't know this, and the reason she didn't know it was because it requires too much effort and conscious attention. She didn't want to spend that much conscious attention thinking about what happened in Buffalo. We take personal credit for all of our successes. We blame our failures on someone else. Usually it's the teacher. Damn him, what's wrong with him? So he picks on me because he hates me so much. One domain in which self-serving biases may be particularly common is the world of sports, but especially among solo athletes for whom the entire weight of winning or losing rests on their shoulders. To maintain their own egos, they must find someone else to blame for their failures. And of course, that is games like tennis and golf. It's kind of hard to blame somebody else when you're the only one there. I was reading, there were Dodgers played the Pirates last night. Pirates have one of the worst records in baseball, And the Dodgers have the best record in baseball. And the Pirates beat the Dodgers. And what happened was the Pirates scored 2 runs in the top of the ninth. They were even in Los Angeles. And it was their reliever that they gave up the 2 runs. But the reason they scored one of the reasons they scored the 2 runs was because the first baseman made an error. And so he was the pitcher was saying, I haven't really pitched very well lately, but you can't blame me for that loss. We should have won. And the reason he was saying that is because of the error of the first baseman. Anyways, almost exonerating himself because the other guy made the error. If he hadn't made the error, they still might have won. Pittsburgh still might have won. Not important. One form of defensive attribution is to believe that bad things happen only to bad people, or at least only to people who make stupid mistakes or poor choices. Therefore, bad things won't happen to us because we won't be that stupid or that careless. Melvin Lerner called this the belief in a just world, the assumption that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. There are good things and bad things about just world beliefs. It helps people deal with feelings of vulnerability and mortality, but unfortunately it often leads to blaming the victim, the rape victims and battered wives. Why didn't you just leave? My wife has volunteered at women's shelters. First time was in Oklahoma. Then she also in Mississippi when we were stationed there. Mississippi was interesting because one of the things she had to do was go with the police. If a woman had asked to go to the women's shelter, sometimes they'd call the police, and the policeman would go pick them up and take them to the women's shelter. So they always took a woman along with them, a civilian along with them, to help with the extrication. And my wife went on 3 or 4 of these. One time the guy started shooting. He didn't hit anything. He was just shooting because he was angry, and he wasn't shooting at anybody. But and he didn't even hit the police car. He was using a hunting rifle, but he was shooting at trees around him. Kind of scary situation because the policeman told him. He said, "I'm just shooting," and they told him that if he fired toward them again, they were going to arrest him. Anyway, that's not important. What I'm thinking of is that a lot of times when they took the woman back to the women's shelter, then they'd have to have an interview, and a lot of times these women were almost every time they were repeat people that had come in, and somebody would inevitably ask them, even though they were told not to, well, why don't you just leave? And of course, that's blaming the victim. It's your fault. You just won't leave. That kind of stuff. When we think of our own attributional biases and other people's biases, we know that other people have more biases than we do. And this is known as bias blind spot. We don't have biases. We know exactly what we're thinking. But we assume they have more biases than we do, even though we can't look into their brains. Western culture is holistic and fosters holistic thinking about properties of objects, properties of people, individual autonomy, Judeo-Christian belief in an individual soul. They pay less attention to situation and context. Values in Eastern cultures foster analytic thinking. Eastern thinking focuses on the object or person and the surrounding context and relationships between them. In the Western world, you must learn to think for yourself. In the Eastern world, you must do what is best for the family. While members of individualistic cultures prefer dispositional attributions and think like personality psychologists, Members of collectivistic cultures prefer situational explanations and think like social psychologists. The greater situational focus is a matter of degree. Self-serving bias, more prevalent in Western individualistic cultures than Eastern collectivist cultures. Explanations of Olympic gold success. Reporters discuss success in terms of unique talent in the United States, but incorporated role of other people, such as the coach and family in Japan. So if we were interviewing a Olympic champion who was Japanese or Chinese, then probably they would mention their coach and their family, while an American, somebody from the United States, Canada, or England would talk about their own personal talent. Failure make attributions to external causes in the United States, but internal causes in China. That's why they failed. So they tend to ruminate. In China, they tend to ruminate about their failures. In the United States, we just forget about it. Self-critical attributions hold groups together in some Asian cultures. And this has to do with because this isn't working, we need to find out what we need to do in the Asian community. So they will negative things will keep them together. In the United States, of course, if something's not working, we just kind of disband the group, and if it ever happens again, then we talk about it. Gun control is kind of this way. Belief in a just world is more prevalent in cultures with extreme differences in wealth. And of course, boy, we have some extreme differences in wealth in the United States. And that is the end of chapter 4. So I'll see you guys next week.